Hello and welcome back to the podcast, everybody. This is Harmony, your podcast host. Today, I am talking to the amazing Lana Hall about how we can stop overacting and how we can let go of our doubt and fear. Lana is a psychologist. She is an author, a wife, and a mama who had the tendency towards worrying about doing enough and getting things right. Pretty sure a lot of us have that tendency. Lana was her very own inspiration for writing her book, The Slow Life Project. In her book and practice, she applies strategies that are evidence-based, research-backed, and can benefit amazing women trying to live their most confident, purpose-driven, and yet relaxed life. So welcome to the podcast, Lana.
Thank you, Harmony. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so happy to have you here. So I always start the podcast with my rapid inspiration questions. Can you inspire us with what your superpower is?
All right. I think my superpower is the ability to take these ideas that can be a little complicated or wordy and put it into something that is super easy for people to understand. So yes, I'm a psychologist and I've always done things like rewrite worksheets. I have to put it in my words. I have to make it as practical as possible for the people I work with. So I think that's something that I do really, really well.
That is an amazing superpower for a practitioner. And I am sure you would be an excellent teacher as well. So. What is your favorite quote or mantra at the moment?
Okay. One I keep coming back to is start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. Actually, when my sister had her son, I wrote a card to her, kind of a card to him as well. And I put that quote in there because I thought it was just such a nice reminder to just show up, be yourself, do what you want to do. And she was like, oh, this is lovely. And she also said to me, you've written me that quote in my card for my birthday last year as well. And so I was like, yes, I think that's a bit of a theme. I'm sure it's on all my social media multiple times. So that's definitely a key quote for me.
Thank you for sharing. I love it. And who or what is inspiring you at the moment?
Yeah, I think what is really inspiring me at the moment is people who are showing up in the public space who are, thought leaders or they've got something to say and who are doing it in a really vulnerable way. Like a lot of us struggle with social media being overly kind of cleaned up and you only see the great things in people's lives and not the messy side. And I just love it when people, particularly, when they're sort of held up as experts, can say, hey, me too, like this stuff isn't easy. I've got these tools, but it doesn't mean that my life is perfect or that I don't have problems. I find those people so relatable and they're also so brave.
Totally. Just keeping it real. People keep it real.
Yeah. Exactly.
Lovely. And what does an inspired life look like to you?
I think inspiration for me is about energy. So it's about knowing how to tune into your own body enough so that you can pick up on your own energy and then having that courage to be like, you know what, that thing feels exciting, which can also be scary, but I'm prepared to pursue that rather than, maybe like the safe choice, and being able to kind of just have some fun with that, roll with that energy, enjoy the process, not worrying about the end results too much, inspiration, creativity, the process.
Yeah, totally. Thank you for sharing. So Lana, you have just published an amazing book called The Slow Life Project. So I would love to hear more about the work that you do and what inspired you to write this book.
Yeah, sure. So the work I do at the moment, and I have been doing that since 2014, I think, is working with men and women, primarily women, adults who have suffered from depression, anxiety, stress. They're adjusting to big changes in their lives and helping them to move through their life as smoothly as possible. So giving them tools to be able to manage some of those things that come up for them, but also exploring those ideas in a non-clinical context. So I started off when I was writing the book and developing the ideas and figuring out, what is the best stuff that helps my clients, that it was stuff that just equally applied to me, that I was using these strategies and benefiting from it just as much as the people I was helping. And then, I'd be talking to friends and family about I was doing this and I realized that I could apply this strategy to it. And they were like, oh, that sounds really interesting. Tell me about what you mean by that. Or I'd say something like, oh, I knew I was catastrophizing and I was thinking about the worst possible outcome. They're like, oh, I do that. What are you meant to do when those sorts of thoughts creep in? And so I was like, oh, there's actually a lot more people that are going to benefit from the ideas that I was using with my clients than the people who are ever going to show up in a psychologist's office. And so then I thought, okay, what I want to do is kind of package up the best of the best, what I think works, and be able to kind of take it out into the world so that people could benefit from that knowledge, people that don't necessarily think, oh, I need to see a psychologist or can't prioritize coming to see somebody, but could just really do with these strategies, basically. Yeah. And that's how the book got written.
Amazing. And with the book, you have really beautifully and thoughtfully divided your book into 3 parts. And the first part is on values. So why did you start with values?
Yeah. Okay. I think values to me are a way of prioritizing your life. So, very much the people that benefit from this book are people who are in that, overwhelmed, we're overthinking, overcommitted. And if you know what's important to you in life, that helps you make decisions about, well, how do I interact with my thoughts? How do I choose the ones that actually reflect that person that I want to be? How do I choose activities that reflect the kind of person that I want to be? So when you have that understanding of who you are, those best parts of yourself, makes it far easier to figure out how to use your time in the best way. But it's also super important in terms of things like, if you know what makes you a good person, like, I guess an example of a value is something like being optimistic. So if you value optimism, you feel satisfied at the end of the day when you've been optimistic, it's so much easier to be able to recognize that you have self-worth, like everyone has self-worth. You don't need to be doing anything to get it. But a lot of people struggle with that idea, and they like to have these kind of hooks at your values to be able to say, oh yeah, okay, this is why I'm a good person. I'm doing these things. I think they're important in life. And that is something that a lot of people struggle with as well, this internal voice that is really, really critical. So I think values, they help you sort of figure out, this is the direction I'm heading, but it's also a real confidence boost to know what are those parts of me that are the very best parts that I'm proud of, and then I'm going to focus on those.
So do you have a practical way that I guess people can determine what their values are? I'm just sort of thinking, because we can sit here and say, oh yeah, my values is family and friends and all of the things. But then when it comes to people testing your values, or you still getting caught up in the day-to-day life, which is, busy, and you're working a lot and you're doing all the jobs around the house and doing all the things as a mom and a businesswoman or whatever that may be for you. But one of your values is your family. But at that same time, you keep sort of neglecting that value, I guess. So is there a way or a strategy that you teach clients to determine their values so that they can really solidify those and make sure that they embody the practice, not just have this fleeting thought of, yeah, well, family is a value of mine, but then never really do anything with that understanding of what that value is?
Yeah. And I mean, that's pretty common. So I've got a big list of values I often share with clients, and they come back and they're like, I've got 28 circled. And it's like, no, you cannot have 28 priorities. So there's lots of different exercises that you can do to discover your values. One is to kind of have a think about, like, how would you like other people to remember you? You know, if someone was going to describe you to their friend who didn't know you, what would you want them to be saying about you? Like, what's really something that you think is important? So that can be one kind of exercise to go through, to have a think about, like, how would you like to be seen in the world? You can also do things like I talked about with the inspiration. Look at what you feel really good about after you finish doing it, you know, so you can do an audit on your life for a week, and you need to be super honest with yourself as part of that, because all values are good, but not all values are actually you. So it's tapping into, like, what actually lights me up, and you need to do this after you do activities, not before, because otherwise, mental chatter or our fears about things can get in the way of seeing how much we actually enjoy it. And the third idea is to look at where your time's currently going. So just because you have a family, and of course you love your family, does not mean that they are one of the key things in your life that are really bringing you excitement, energy, satisfaction. You know, a lot of people have a family of some kind, a group of friends of some kind, a partner. But there's a difference between having those things and enjoying them and appreciating them, and saying, you know what, they are one of the key things that actually drive me as a person. So it's being able to sort of make that distinction. And I guess that's where it comes in, that it's super important to be honest with yourself and know that you can be a mom without valuing parenting, without having being a parent as a core part of your identity. And sometimes having that realization can help people to drop the guilt if they're not putting all their time into their kids, or all their time into their business, or all their time into their partner or their friends, you know, like depending on your own personal issues, that's where your guilt will show up.
Yeah, I think that's really important to take note of, like, to be super, super honest about your values. And I love that you've sort of given, I guess, I don't know the right terminology, not people an out, like family being a value out, like, but I guess to be able to be really honest, like, is it your number one driving force for running your business? Is it your number one driving force for living and being and, like, embodying, you know, that your family? Or are you just using that as a value because you should use it because it's what, you know, especially women and mothers are seen to, in the public eye, to have to value the most in their life? And I guess, I can see how there would be a lot of guilt associated with not having family in your top value. So thank you for saying that and allowing the listeners who might be questioning that to give them a different perspective on what that would look like for them. So, and then I guess also, like, when our values, so if we have determined our values, and they might be I don't know, to live from this place of optimism, or to be very non-judgmental and open-minded, all of these things. And what happens when your values are being tested? Like, how can we, I guess, reflect on that? And I know a lot of people's values are probably being tested in this day and time with so many conflicting thoughts and information and just people's different ways of expectations around the whole COVID situation, for instance. Like, a lot of values are being tested and questioned. And so how do you tell those people, how do you support those people with that aspect?
Okay. I guess to me, one of the things that's really key about values is that it's important to have some character-driven values. So that would be something like optimism or independence, as well as other values like connecting to nature or creativity. implicit in my description of values is the idea that they need to be words that demonstrate a quality that can be used pretty much anywhere, anytime, any place, by anyone. That's the other one. So even as circumstances are changing around you, and even as there's particular restrictions put on you, there will be ways that you can show up and live by those values. You may just have to get really creative in thinking about how does that look in this situation. But particularly if we're thinking character, you can choose an optimistic response to any situation. It's just figuring out, what does optimism actually look like in this kind of situation. And that is often where, it does help to come and see somebody like myself, because sometimes that's really, really hard to figure out. And it's especially hard to figure out for ourselves. So even though I do this all day, every day, I would still engage professionals to help me figure out what's an optimistic response, because it's just really hard to see your own life yourself sometimes. But yeah, you've got to have a think about, well, what's an optimistic thing to think? What was someone who believes that this is happening, say, like for them, not to them? What would they do in this situation? What actions are they taking? How are they talking to other people? And what are they telling themselves? They're the things we've got control over. And then for values like creativity, like if you are restricted in terms of, like maybe you used to go to dance classes and now you can no longer go because the classes have to be COVID safe. It's important to figure out, okay, well, why did I like that dance class? Like, was it the creative, expressive element? And if so, what can I do that's creative and expressive in my own home? But if you had a different value and you really liked connecting with the other people in that class, then you don't need to worry so much about your creative expression. You need to worry about your connection with other people and how do I do that from my house. Even something like being part of a team, like we're part of this dance troupe and we go to these performances, that's a slightly different feel, and you'd want to replace it with a slightly different activity. Then I'm there to kind of connect with people one-on-one. So you can certainly always figure it out. I've sort of made the definition of values in my work to be so that they can be very flexible. It can be used by different people and at different stages in your life as well. It's just the work of figuring it out individually can be tricky.
And it sounds like just really reflecting on your reactions to different situations. Yeah,
definitely. Like our responses is the one thing we always get control over. And obviously sometimes that's tricky. Theoretically, it's the one element we always get to choose.
Yeah. Do you think it would be like a good idea to maybe even make a post-it note, or those people who are creative make a beautiful poster of like your top 3 values and hang them somewhere in your house so that you're constantly reminded of what you aspire to achieve throughout your day?
Yeah, definitely. So whatever you need to do to remind yourself. I'm a huge fan of getting people to have a think when they first wake up in the morning, what value am I going to focus on? And then to spend a couple of minutes visualizing, all right, how am I going to use that today? What does that look like in terms of the activities I've got on? And then, yes, it's just the more reminders, the better. So, the lock screen on your phone is always a good one. The poster is a beautiful idea. Post-its work. Everything works. We want to get it into our brain as often as possible. And important to think about as well in terms of connecting to our subconscious, that what we put into our minds first thing in the morning is what we're telling our brain is important for that day, and that we want to focus on those things that day. So when you look at the poster, the post-it note, if you're thinking about your values first thing in the morning, you've got a much greater chance of then acting on them without you even having to do anything consciously about it. That subconscious part of your mind is just scanning the environment, looking for those opportunities for you.
Brilliant. So part 2 of your book is all about confidence, goals, and resilience. How do we build resilience? Because I feel like that is a really big task. these days, building
Yes.
resilience.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, there's a lot of different elements that go into resilience. I suppose some of the key ones in terms of my work does relate a bit back to what we talked about before, that it's about knowing where your power is in a situation. So what tends to make people feel or act more resiliently compared to other people who get overwhelmed by situations is that the people who are resilient can see a way forwards. They can see where their personal power might lie in the situation, whether that is just showing up with a particular attitude or whether that's more about how I can control my situation, how I can take charge, how I can, if I lost my job, maybe I'll start my own business. Whereas a non-sort of resilient attitude is more about feeling like the stuff around you is in charge. So I lost my job and the job market is terrible, so I can't get another job. And so then I can't take care of myself and my family. It's a really powerless space. So resilience is about where do I find my power, and then when I have that sense of power, a bit of sense of control, then I can feel hopeful about the future. And that's super important in terms of resilience as well, to be able to see that although there's challenges for me now, I believe that in the future this is going to shift and change.
And it's about, I guess, being able to adapt to change and being able to pivot and all of those things. So is there any specific take-home tool that somebody can do to build resilience? Say they're listening to this and they know that they feel vulnerable and they feel weak in those situations, and they've recognized that they just don't have a lot of resilience to change. Is there one sort of tool or strategy you can speak on that will help build that resilience?
Yeah, so I mean, I normally take people through quite a process with that. And I guess the first part of that process is about looking at what you did well in the circumstances. So often when we're hit by something, a failure, loss, we immediately, it's your brain, your brain immediately will go to, what did I do kind of wrong that meant that this situation happened? And it's doing that from a problem-solving perspective. It wants to take care of you. So it's like, hey, if we were doing things differently, maybe this won't happen. But if you get locked in what you did wrong, you're going to feel terrible. So having a look at what you're actually doing well in the situation, what you got right. A lot of people just really struggle to even think about that. Their brain has just become hyper-focused on the problems. So having a look at like, okay, what did I actually do well? And then that's a really good base to have a think about. Like, it boosts your confidence when you're in that space, when you can have a look at like, okay, this is difficult, but I did X, Y, and Z really well. And then you can have a think about, okay, well, what one thing would I like to take from this? What one thing do I want to do differently? And again, if you don't know this process, you'll have like 20 things and you'll feel overwhelmed, and how can I do them all? And we're back to that sort of powerless, hopeless space. So it is only allowed to be one thing. One feels manageable. And then if you can tie that back to, okay, how does that connect to a value of mine? Because then that also helps you to feel like it's more possible for you. I can do this thing differently. So your brain's starting to stress less about being locked in a similar situation for a long period of time. Connect it to a part of you that you think that you do well at, that you feel satisfied when you act on it. Okay, cool. Now I feel like I want to do this one thing differently. And then starting to take action as soon as possible on that particular value. So it might not be, so if we're thinking about something like the job loss situation, it might be that something you're good at doing is connecting with other people. So if you can think about that connection, okay, that will help me in terms of talking to other people about how I need a job, or connecting really well in an interview, but I don't have those things right this second. So how am I going to connect with other people straight away so that you can just reach out to a friend or a family member? But when you're taking action on the value quite quickly like that, that sends a message to your brain, oh, things are going to be different, and it's taking some of that power and the sense that the future will be different back into your own hands. Like, look at me already connecting in the ways that I can. As soon as an opportunity comes to connect with other people, I'm going to take it when that could lead to my job. So it just builds up this sort of sense of hope and momentum. And then you're in a space where you're feeling so much better about that situation.
I love that process. It's really empowering. Like,
Yeah.
you can see how it definitely builds that resilience, because you're building, like, you feel empowered to make changes, and that you can step into this action and achieve what you know, even if it's something you're achieving something different and it didn't work for you before. That's why you're in this situation. You're really moving through it. And I think once you've been able to move yourself through difficult situations, you know that you can tackle the next one with less fear, maybe, and more, I guess, more streamlined road to get through it, because you know that you've done it before and you can reflect on what works. I love how you started it with reflecting on what you did well, because we always go into that self-doubt and that self-criticism first when things don't go our way, because we're like, why did this happen, or how did this happen, or why am I so crap at everything? But when you look at it like from that positive sort of aspect, well, what did I do well, and then what can I, work on? It just makes it so much more of a more pleasant process.
Yes. Definitely.
And confident building, really a lot of confidence. And so I guess I'd love to also, well, we can't go past touching on part 3 of the book, because it all rolls beautifully together. I really love how you've laid it out. And so part 3 is all about being able to dissolve the blocks that are holding you back from reaching your goals and living your most inspired life. Are you able to share with us some of the blocks that you've personally faced and how you have overcome them?
Yeah, definitely. I think all the blocks, they kind of apply to all of us in different areas, and they all roll together. So the 3 big block areas that I talk about are struggling with motivation, which is our actions, plus our thinking, the way that we talk to ourselves about situations, and then our emotions. And, like, with very psychological, cognitive behavioral therapy perspective, is that your thoughts create your feelings, and then your thoughts and your feelings produce particular actions, and that they often go around in quite a circular way, sort of feeding each other. So it's really hard to kind of say, what has been a particular struggle, but I guess I do tend to come back to the thoughts, and so some of the thoughts that got in, I'm just trying to think, because when I wrote the book, I actually had a big struggle period in between when I finished writing the book and actually getting the book out into the world, and part of that was getting really overwhelmed with editing the book. So I could write it all fine, but when it came to which bits to keep and which bits to leave out, I was really sort of tying myself up in knots. And it probably does come back to that sense of like, what's the right things to put in and what's the right things to leave out, like this idea that there could be a perfect book created out of it that just doesn't exist. And that is something that I talk about in the book. So that's kind of like a value judgment. And we mentioned the word should before, and that's another huge one as well. So what should I be doing? Am I doing enough? Am I doing too much? Was I too much, too loud? It's endless, those kinds of thoughts. And they can often trip me up from action. So they certainly did with the book. But also, like you said, there's a lot of demands on us in everyday life. And if you wanted to be like the perfect wife, the perfect mother, the perfect business owner, the greatest friend, the greatest family member, there's so many things that you should be doing, and they far outweigh the amount of things you would actually be doing. And then that gap between what we think we should be doing and what we're actually doing will create feelings of doubt, fear, guilt, and all of those will then block our motivation to actually take action. And so you can intervene at any particular different space to get out of that. For my book, what I ended up having to do was ask for help from an editor to sort of say, just focus on these little bits. This is what you need to be looking at, to take all the shoulds out of my head and the maybe this and maybe that too much, and just be like, no, most of this is fine. Just look at this part here, and to get some of that specificity, which is a great antidote to thoughts like, is this enough? What does enough actually mean? Because once you get specific about it, that often helps you realize that you are doing enough. It's actually fine. And that can help you let go of those thoughts, and then those feelings are less, and then it's much easier to take action.
And for those women or men, if they're listening, but predominantly my clientele is women. So for those people who are listening and they do have a tendency to overreact to things. So in that split moment, they can become very judgmental, or they can quickly snap at the kids. They can become very overreactive with their thoughts and their actions. Or I guess it might even come from a place of being really overwhelmed from different things going on, and that moment just really triggered them. How can those people better manage their reaction and better manage their thoughts?
Yeah. I think in terms of reactions, like psychology is a really, it's a preventative. It's very much like your vitamins rather than your antibiotics. So it is a lot about practices, like if I think about becoming so emotional that I'm acting in a way that I'm no longer happy with, there's a lot of sort of pre-events that have gone into that. So having a think about slowing down your thinking overall is really, really helpful. Overwhelm to a large degree comes from having too many competing priorities and too many thoughts about things that aren't actually happening right now. So if you can choose one particular thing that you're focusing on as the most important thing for you, that immediately helps with overwhelm. But it is also about then being able to put that into practice and focusing just on the thing that you're doing at that particular point in time. So a lot of something that might trip you up, like if you get to the point where you're yelling at your kids, is that the thought process is something like, oh, that's so annoying. They've done that 10 times this morning and about 100 times in the last week. I don't think I can cope with any more of this particular behavior. So we're not just focused on the one time anymore. We're going back into the past and we're jumping forwards into the future. And the thing about our brain is it's just not that great at telling the difference between what's in our imagination and what's actually happening in reality. So when you run all these different ideas through your head really quickly, it does create some of the emotion of living through it. And you totally couldn't cope with if all those things were happening at once. So the more that we can kind of just focus on what's happening right now and resist those thinking patterns that go, back into the past or out into the future about what this situation means and what's going to happen next, that helps so much with being able to stay out of the space where your feelings are so big that they're just going to come out of your body no matter what. I always say to my clients, like, by the time you get to like 8 or 9 out of 10 of any particular emotion, does not matter who you are, it's coming out of your body. You are yelling or you are crying or you are shaking with fear. Like it's just a level. There's nothing wrong with you. What we want to do is just keep people away from that really high level. And so people you see that don't get to that point where their emotions are in charge are just better at doing the preventative stuff. But if there was enough stress placed on them, they got to an 8 or a 9, they would be doing the same thing. So that is something to think about, that the more that you can stay present and just focus on the one thing that's happening right now, the less likely you are to get overwhelmed. Even really basic stuff like it doesn't have to be anything stressful you're thinking about. If you were running your to-do list through your head, it's still the same sort of thing. It's like living through that experience, but in a really short period of time, and you can overwhelm yourself like that as well. And the other thing is, like you mentioned it before, self-criticism, it is stressful. So it will also send your emotional reactions up towards that 8 or 9 point. So the nicer you can be to yourself, the less likely you are to get up to that point. And so many people struggle with this and have this idea that criticizing themselves is the only way that they'll improve. And it does work. It does change our behavior. It's just nowhere near as effective as talking to people in a kind way. And, like parenting is sort of up to that space now. The general way that people are taught about parenting is that, you do need to focus on the positives. It's coming through in workplace psychology as well, that it's really important to focus on what your employees are doing right rather than criticize them to get the best results. But still a lot of people hold on to that idea for themselves, that if I'm kind to myself, I'll get lazy. I won't put the work in. And just tell you, psychological research says you're wrong. But you need to test it out for yourself as well to try out. I think a really simple way to do that is just to think to yourself, what would I tell a friend who is in this situation? So if you just yelled at your kids and you're like, oh, I'm a terrible mother, what's wrong with me? If you saw your friend at a park and she's just having a moment where she loses it with her children, no way would you go over and go, what's wrong with you? You are a terrible mother. Like, there's just no way. So
Totally.
yeah, thinking about it in terms of like, what would I actually say to somebody else in this situation? Like, you'd be like, oh, what a hard day. This happens to everybody. Don't worry about it. That's the way you want to talk to yourself. And then that is such a soothing, calming space to be in that it actually then prevents you from getting into that space in the future. It's less likely. It's always going to happen, every so often. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I also think that, like you were just speaking about, if you do say yell at your kids or have a argument with a colleague or whatever that may be or look like for you, you can start to really criticize yourself and get in your own head and make the situation so much worse in your head than what it really is. And what I find often is you can sit in that for a really long period of time, but to be able to break that, there's no reason you can't apologize to your kid and just explain how you're feeling. And like, I see a lot of women in my clinic who are really stressed out. They're trying to be the perfect mother, the wife, they're at work, all of the things. And when they have these sort of situations with their kids, their family, their husband, whoever it may be, they come in and they're really, really exhausted and they're really, really stressed because of the amount of times they've hit replay on that situation in their head, and it's burnt them out, and they physically haven't had to live it the 30 million times, but they've had to relive it in their heads 30 million times. So it feels to them like it's this big event, this really huge mission that they've had to go through. And sometimes it's just as simple as, having the situation, let it pass, and then go and talk to the person about the situation in more of a level-head sort of manner. If you need to apologize, or if not even apologize, if that's not what needs to happen, but be able to explain your feelings and why it may have occurred. I know with my kids, like if, it's mad rush in the morning and I've got to get to work or all of these things, and I've sort of yelled at them, especially if it's been like around my cycle, then I might say, oh, I'm really sorry about that. Like it's not that big a deal, but I'm just stressed at the moment. I've got this on. They know all about a women's cycle, a women's hormones. They know all about the stress of adulting and parenthood, because me and my husband explain that to them. Like, we say, hey, this is what's going on through our head. Like, it's no excuse, but this is what's going on. And they are so much better about it as well. They don't take it so personally.
Definitely. Yeah. And I think with kids, it's super important that they actually do see us do that every so often, for the reason that you're saying. you get to then explain about how sometimes difficult situations and stressful situations cause us to act in particular ways, but it's only temporary and it's okay, and they can see that you still accept yourself as a person, and then that gives them permission when they have those moments to not feel horrible about it. You can really kind of break that cycle in terms of people internalizing the criticism, because if all you ever see is people around you being amazing and not losing it, you then have that standard for yourself. So I think, you actually kind of need to be imperfect and just share that. It's so powerful for kids to know that, adults get scared or they don't know what's coming next, or they get, just a whole range of emotions.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they deal with it a lot better when they understand why you've reacted the way you did.
Wow. Definitely. Yes.
Well, to wrap it up, I guess I would love for you to give us 3 take-home tips on how to release doubt and fear. So a lot of people are consumed with this self-doubt, this fear, where they want to go and live their most inspired life. They want to build that business, or they want to just be the best person they can be, or get their voice out there, or write a book, whatever that may be. They hold on to a lot of self-criticism, which we have sort of spoke about, but a lot of doubt and fear. So what are your top 3 tips on being able to release doubt and fear?
Okay, I think the first one has to come back to starting small. And so that is, references the quote I had at the start as well, that a lot of times what makes it really difficult to take action is that the action seems too big and too scary. From a psychological perspective, we like people to sit at like about a 4 to 5 out of 10 in terms of their fear, if they're going to actually be able to have a chance of following through and being able to lessen that fear going forwards. So if you've got a fear level of doing something, or a doubt level that's 6 or 7, you can probably push yourself through to do the thing once, but it will be so stressful for you that you really won't be able to be consistent with it. Whereas if we break things down into really small pieces, make it so easy you can't say no is also another quote I like in relation to that, then you will be able to get started in a very manageable way for you. And then once you've had that initial success, that allows you to then feel more confident, like it's more possible for you, and be able to take the next step. So I'd say, if you're caught in doubt and fear, make it smaller, make it smaller. You can't go too small. Most people stuff up by going too big and trying to make too many changes too fast. So that's number 1. The second one would be to focus on the effort that you're making rather than results that you get. This is probably my number 2 favorite quote as well. When we're assessing ourselves according to our values and doing what's important to us, we do need to focus on how we're showing up and not the results that we're getting out there in the world. That is out of our control. And, what we said with resilience, it's important to focus on what is within our control. So if you put in a lot of work into a project that you are excited about, you want to focus on things like your determination and your belief in that project, not on how many other people congratulate you on the project or how sort of externally successful that project is. We often do those things because we're looking for validation or a sense of I'm good enough, and you can just give that to yourself. So let's take the middleman out and all the unpredictability of the external world out, and just work with, I'm going to focus on my efforts, and then I'm going to make sure that I'm the primary person that's giving myself positive feedback about those efforts, because then I can just detach even further from the world and the outcome, and I've got even more power in my own life. So if I know how to kind of show up and do the things that matter to me in a manageable way, I'm focused on how I show up, and I'm really praising myself a lot for the way that I show up, that will then cycle around. Your confidence will build. You can then take the next bigger action. You're going to keep focusing on your efforts rather than results, because if the results don't go the way you want, it will drop your confidence. And then as you're taking those actions, you are just focused on being really kind to yourself and building yourself up for taking those actions. So it's courageous to do that kind of work, and you really need to recognize that within yourself if you want to be able to move past that doubt and that fear. It's just acknowledging what's already there. You're doing an amazing job.
Thank you. You have just shared us with so much beautiful information and insight, and really helping people build their confidence and build their resilience, showing people how they can, stop reacting so much and let go of that fear and the doubt. And even if that fear or doubt is related to having those small, meaningful conversations with people, sometimes it's really hard to approach different people. Even the tips that you've just explained, then all of those can be put into practice for the smallest things that are creating fear and doubt within ourselves as well. So it's been such a beautiful conversation and so many practical strategies that you've given us. So I really appreciate for you coming on and just pouring out all of your wisdom onto us. So thank you so much.
It's my favorite thing to do. I love sharing with people what does that practically look like in the world. So it was a lovely opportunity to be on the show. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And where can everybody go and buy your book? Because after this conversation, they're going to be like, oh, damn, I need more of that.
Totally. So Amazon and Booktopia are a couple of the big online sites. I'm from Brisbane, so there's a few Brisbane local bookstores. So it's always nice to support local if you can. So they're Bookface in Springfield, Little Bird in Paddington, Books at Stones in Stones Corner, and Avid Reader in West End all have copies of the book. And also if you jump on my website, which is theslowlifeproject.com, there's links to buy the books there, and you can also grab an ebook and workbook bundle, which has exercises for each of the chapters in the book. So if you're really keen to take that work deeper, take the practicality and implementation as far as you can, then that's a really great way to engage with the book.
Wonderful. I love that, because it's through the action. We can read all of the things, but it's not until we actually apply it to our life that we get the most benefit from it. So I love that you've done that. Thank you so much for that as well. And I will put your website link in the show notes.
Lovely. And the other thing is, socials. I'm at slowlifeproject.co on Facebook and Instagram. And so that is just another channel that I'm sharing practical strategies around these kinds of ideas as well.
Beautiful. We love the practical. It's always good. Thank you so much, Lana, and namaste to all of our listeners.
Namaste.
Namaste.